Hi, my name is Malin, and today I want to share a little Christmassy presentation about how Santa's reindeer got their names and the associations we might have with them. And I want to start off with some facts about reindeers that you might not know. First of all, as the name might suggest, reindeer are a type of deer, and are actually the same animal as caribou. The distinction made in North America is that reindeer are just domesticated caribou, whereas caribou are wild. And in pretty much all other species of deer, only the males have antlers, but female reindeer actually have antlers as well. And I'll talk more about that in a second, but overall, males have larger antlers than females and are maybe a little bigger in the body. But other than that, they can be difficult to tell apart, as there aren't many major physical differences between male and female reindeer. So, while both sexes of reindeers have antlers, they have them at varying points in the year. So male reindeer begin to grow their antlers in February and shed them in November, which is before Christmas. Female reindeer, on the other hand, begin to grow their antlers in May, but keep them throughout the winter. A reindeer that is pregnant will carry through the winter and only shed their antlers in the spring after the calves are born. The antlers on a pregnant reindeer help them to fend off other reindeer in fights over food. They live in the Arctic, where food can get scarce in the harsh winters, and so this basically means that Santa's reindeer would most likely be female, or more specifically, pregnant females, given that they're often pictured with their antlers. As a group, reindeer often travel in herds of 10 to 100, but multiple herds can group into super herds in the spring and get even larger. Finally, reindeer have hairy hooves that help them to stand on any surface, and they're actually covered in hair on every inch of their bodies to help them keep warm in the Arctic air. I want to start by talking about the origin on not only the reindeer names themselves, but Saint Nick's association with reindeer as a whole, which all goes back to "'Twas the Night Before Christmas." "'Twas the Night Before Christmas" was a poem written by Clement Clarke Moore. It was originally called A Visit from St. Nicholas, and was published in December of 1823. And the title that we know it as today just comes from the first line, "'Twas the night before Christmas," establishing the scene. And if you celebrate Christmas, you've almost certainly heard this poem before. I had a copy as a child that was turned into a picture book, and many versions similar to that exist, telling the story as a picture book rather than just as a poem. But in case you've forgotten or haven't read it in a while, in short, the poem is about a family settling down to sleep on Christmas Eve when the father hears a disturbance. He sees Saint Nick in a sleigh with 8 reindeer, and they get called by name. He then watches Saint Nick place presents in the stockings before he disappears into the night. So this poem is actually the first time the reindeer are ever named, though the association between Saint Nick and reindeer was established only 2 years earlier. So a sled pulled by one reindeer appeared in the book The Children's Friend No. 3, published by William Giley in 1821. So this picture on the right is from the first page and shows Santa Claus in a sleigh pulled by a single reindeer. Also, throughout this, I say Saint Nick because that's pretty much what he was in those days. The Santa Claus that we know and love today was pretty much invented by Coca-Cola during the rise of commercialism. So the Saint Nick of the 1820s is very different from the Santa Claus of 2025. But that's a whole other story, and we're talking about reindeer today. Now, the full poem is a little long for me to want to read it all here, so instead, I'm going to read a short excerpt of the most relevant part, when the sleigh and the reindeer come in. "To the moon on the breast of the new-fallen snow gave a lustre of midday to objects below, when what to my wondering eyes did appear but a miniature sleigh and 8 tiny reindeer. With a little driver so lively and quick, I knew in a moment he must be Saint Nick. More rapid than eagles his coursers they came, and he whistled and shouted and called them by name. Now Dasher, now Dancer, now Prancer and Vixen, on Comet, on Cupid, on Donder and Blitzen, to the top of the porch, to the top of the wall, now dash away, dash away, dash away all." With that in mind, I want to go over each of the reindeer names and what they mean, using literal dictionary definitions since most of them are more words than actual names. So to start with Dasher, to dash is to move with sudden speed. With Dancer, to dance is to move one's body rhythmically to music, but this can also be used more metaphorically, referring to graceful movement. Prancer, so to prance is to spring from the hind legs or move while doing so, which is kind of like a hop, I guess, and could also be seen a bit gracefully. As for vixen, there's actually 3 different noun meanings for vixen. So vixen is a female fox in the same way a female sheep is a ewe, just what the female version of the animal is called. A vixen is also a shrewish, ill-tempered woman. And finally, a vixen is also an attractive woman, so maybe the opposite of the last one. As for comet, a comet is a celestial body that appears as a fuzzy head, usually surrounded by a bright nucleus. And I cut this definition a little short, but basically, it's a pretty space rock. Cupid is the Greek god of erotic love, often depicted as a naked, usually winged boy, often holding a bow and arrow. And Cupid is heavily associated with Valentine's Day and not so much Christmas. Donder is simply the Dutch word for thunder. Thunder is the sound that follows a flash of lightning. And more recent references to the reindeer in either this poem or other media often change its name to Donner, which is the German word for thunder. Blitzen follows from Donder. It is halfway between the German and Dutch words for lightning, The German word for lightning is blitz, and the Dutch word is bliksem. And lightning is the flashing of light produced by a discharge of atmospheric electricity. So the last two are both storm things, yet thunder comes first here. So I'm going to start by sharing some observations I had about these names as someone who's really into names. Firstly, I think that all of the names generally evoke a sense of rapidity, moving very fast, but also moving very gracefully. And I think this image aligns with Santa and his reindeer being able to visit every house in one night. They need to be able to move fast, but also deliberately when landing on roofs. And this is where a reindeer's hooves, allowing them to stand on like any surface, really comes in handy. I will add that Cupid's kind of the exception here. They might not sound very fast or graceful, but Cupid is still associated with flying. As for the sounds of the names themselves, there's a lot of obstruent sounds. These are sounds that obstruct airflow, making them sound harsher. And in English, these sounds are often associated with more masculine names, whereas feminine names tend to end in vowels, and none of these names do. Feminine names that don't end in vowels still tend to end in sonorants, which are smoother, more gliding sounds, and while a few of these names do end in R or N, there's still a lot of obstruent sounds in the D's and the T's and the P's, the sounds like that. So overall, I think these names seem kind of disjoint, as if they don't belong to one group, and yet they also feel like they are in designated pairs. It's on Dasher, on Dancer, on Prancer, and Vixen. I think that really only Donder and Blitzen go together, being thunder and lightning, but the rest just feel kind of thrown in. But maybe we can imagine that when Santa got these reindeer, Donder and Blitzen were siblings, so he named them things that go together, and the others are just kind of random reindeer. Now, I'm really into names. I spend a lot of time thinking about names, I make a lot of videos about names, which is why I realized that I might be viewing these names with a different lens. And that's why I asked 7 of my friends for their impressions of the reindeer names. I asked them to think about what kind of imagery is evoked. Do the names fit together as a group? Do they fit reindeer or do they fit humans? Is there a certain gender they associate with the reindeer? And I want to share some of their responses here because while some of them agreed with me on certain aspects, some of them saw it differently. It is worth mentioning, I'm in college and the people I asked were also in college and are in their early 20s, and all of them celebrate Christmas, so it's a pretty narrowed view here. So as for the imagery, one friend actually gave specific adjectives to each reindeer, and like me, assigned adjectives that were powerful, fast, or graceful descriptors. However, some of the others had some pretty interesting responses. One of my friends saw them as, quote, a bunch of cool people, but like old cool people that all died in the 80s due to drug-related causes. Another said, quote, these names evoke imagery of reindeer because that's what I commonly associate them with in context. And that makes a lot of sense. You don't really hear these as names outside of the reindeer. Another said, quote, they remind me of My Little Pony at the start. I'm not entirely sure what he means by that. And finally, another simply said Christmas cookie, providing nothing more. However, there was general agreement that the names don't really fit as a group. Most said either none went together or only a few go together, commonly citing Donder and Blitzen, which are the only 2 names that actually do go together, thunder and lightning. Additionally, only 2 people said that all 8 names go together. All of them agreed that these are better names for reindeer than humans. However, one added that they could work as a chosen name that someone chooses for themselves, but maybe not so much as a given name, and another said that they don't work for humans because they're just all kind of goofy names, and only one thought that any name could work for a human, and that name was Donder. Finally, there was little agreement about the gendering of names. 3 said they thought of the reindeers as all being male, 2 said they had no specific gender association, and 2 gave specific genders. So one thought that Cupid, Vixen, and Dancer felt the most feminine, and the other actually listed which gender they associated with each reindeer, and said Dasher was male, Dancer was female, Prancer was female, Vixen was female, Comet was non-binary, Cupid was non-binary. He did specify Donner and not Donder was male, and Blitzen was either female or male. However, no one said that they associated all of the reindeer with being female. And although they might not know this fact, as I said at the start, Santa's reindeer would most likely be female given they have antlers at Christmas. Male reindeers don't have antlers at Christmas. One thing I didn't get to ask my friends because I thought of this later was what order are the reindeer in? Santa's calling the names of all 8 reindeer pulling a sleigh, but where's he getting this order from? Are Dasher and Dancer at the head leading the sleigh, or are Donder and Blitzen at the head leading the sleigh? Is he calling from the ones closest to him to the ones farthest to him? Or the ones that lead to the ones that follow? Or is he just calling them in a random order? This is of course in the pre-Rudolph days, but let me know what you think the order of the reindeer is. Of course, we can't talk about Santa's reindeer without mentioning the most famous reindeer of all, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. So the name Rudolph is an English variant of the name spelled with an F. Rudolph with an F comes from the German name Rudolph, and I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that correctly. This name is comprised of 2 Germanic elements, Rud meaning fame and Wolf meaning wolf. So Rudolph means famous wolf, which is about half right, and Rudolph is what I call a name cousin of Roger, meaning that they share one element in common. They both contain rod, and Roger also has ger, meaning spear. The name Rudolph was most popular in the US in the 1920s, peaking in 1927 when it was given to 1,689 boys. But the name has largely fallen out of use since then, and this can likely be attributed to the reindeer associations, but I still think Rudolph is a cute name. And historically, the name Rudolph does have some very powerful associations. It was the name of many kings and dukes in Germanic areas of the world. Now, as for the origins of the story of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer originated when a department store called Montgomery Ward asked an employee named Robert L. May to create a story for promoting Christmas giveaway in 1939. The store gave away coloring books every year, but found that it would be cheaper to just make their own. So May was tasked with coming up with a story to go with the coloring book. Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer is perhaps most well known from the 1949 song Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, written by Johnny Marks in 1949, who was the brother-in-law of Robert L. May. The story also later became the 1964 claymation movie of the same name. If you don't really remember this story, the song describes it pretty well. Basically, Rudolph has a red, light-up nose that glows. He's picked on by the other reindeers, but when there's a foggy Christmas Eve, and Santa's not really going to be able to see when he goes out to deliver presents, he asks Rudolph to lead the reindeer and light the way. And then everyone loves him from then on. And in writing this story, Robert L. May used a part of himself to become Rudolph, because he was an outcast as a child. And as he wrote it, he considered other names for the titular character, but May's 5-year-old daughter liked the name Rudolph the best. And I think this was a good decision, because most of the other names on May's list don't have as powerful of meanings, or they just sound a lot more innocent. Also, Rudolph was a more common name for children at the time of its publication, perhaps allowing the children who received that coloring book to relate to the character a little more. And I found in a picture on an NPR article that the other names he considered were Rodney, Roddy, Roderick, Rudolph, Rudy, Rollo, Roland, Reggie, Reginald, and Romeo. In surveying my friends, I also asked what they thought the other reindeer were calling Rudolph, since the song says that all of the other reindeer used to laugh and call him names. The responses I got were Twinklenose, Reddy McRednose with, and he wrote this in parentheses, they're not the most creative bunch, Fire Alarm, Penny, short for Pennywise from It, and Gumball Nose. I think the best two here are Twinklenose and Reddy McRednose, as those do sound like the most childish ones. So in conclusion, we need more reindeer in the media. I think reindeer are fun. So what did we learn here? So first of all, reindeer are fun animals, and I learned a lot more about reindeer than I thought I would making this. And they haven't been associated with Saint Nick for as long as you might think. Also, Santa's reindeer are probably all female, as male reindeers don't have antlers at Christmas time. The reindeer also have an interesting selection of names, which makes me wonder how Clement Moore came up with them. They evoke very different imagery individually, and they don't really fit together as a whole, and none of the names are inherently Christmassy. They seem kind of random, if anything. But I also think that Rudolph has a nicely chosen name. It seems like Robert L. May put some nice thought into picking out a name for his character. And that's the end of my reindeer presentation. Subscribe if you want to see more videos, and hope you have a Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays.